We've been here before. This isn't my first video being baby mad about a faction that annoyed me in a game, but I assure you, that doesn't mean that what you're about to hear is anything but the most objective truth about the level of garbage that is this faction. But a faction can be trashed for a variety of different reasons. With Khorne, I despise the gameplay. Unga Bunga, I just win in melee and stop thinking. I don't care that Khorne factions can have a surprising amount of depth. Most people play them like Unga Bunga Beatstick Army, and it can be infuriating to fight them when the slightest mistake takes you to the Khorne 8-pound town. Or Bretonnia, where all other things considered, they're just so unbelievably boring and unoriginal. Yes, I like King Arthur. No, making a faction entirely based off King Arthur doesn't cut it. I need more than knights are cool for a faction because that isn't going anywhere. Everyone knows knights are cool, you actually have to do something beyond that. Especially when both the Empire and the High Elves have their own knights, as well as 1,000 other reasons those factions are interesting. But the Thousand Sons hit their own kind of suck in a different way. Bretonnia and Khorne, regardless of their faults, get plenty of victories and moments of glory. Khorne is Khorne and is therefore the only Chaos God allowed to truly shine. If you think that's a bit extreme, consider Age of Sigmar's opening lore, where Khorne's forces got bored after Chaos conquered the mortal realms and attacked every other Chaos faction at once. And as for Bretonnia, even I have to admit that you gotta break out the cannons or magical weapons if you want to take down a Grail Knight. I hate them more than any other, but they're tough. But the Thousand Sons? Among other reasons, I think they suck because they're just so pathetic. From beginning to end, the tale of the Thousand Sons is just feeling sorry for them. The universe itself seems to hate them, and you know what? I'm not going to try to change that. Instead, I'm going to partake in what I consider to be a time-honored tradition. Kicking the vile sons of Magnus the Red square in the ribs. But before we start, tell me, are you not right now listening to my voice? Do you know what you could be listening to me on? Raycon and their Everyday Earbuds, the sponsor of this video. Now Raycon's Everyday Earbuds sound great, of course, but you're a savvy consumer. You want more than that, and Raycon provides. Active noise cancellation has got to be the best feature earphones can have, because when I put mine in, I want to forget the outside world exists. Luckily, Raycon provides. If you so choose, any outside sounds can be a thing of the past while you listen to whatever you please. And tell me, is Black Friday not the perfect time to grab yourself something like the Raycon Everyday Earbuds? Because Raycon rivals the quality of some of the biggest names out there at half the price, and that's before they come out the gates swinging with an up to 30% discount for Black Friday on their entire site. As for my personal favorite features, that sweet 32-hour battery life is a godsend. When I inevitably forget to charge them for several days on end, I don't even have to worry about it. They'll still have more than enough charge to get me through whatever I'm doing, which as of late is assembling my Tomb Kings after putting that off for way too long. As a bonus, they've even got wireless charging. And because of this lovely protective case, when I accidentally drop them on the floor for the 5th time that hour, I can rest easy knowing they'll be safe and sound. And just for you, my wonderful viewer, I have a deal. If you go to buyraycon.com/pancreasnowork, you can get yourself up to 30% off site-wide. The whole website, up to 30% off if you go to buyraycon.com/pancreasnowork. A good pair of earbuds is wonderful, and you can get Raycon's fantastic everyday earbuds for an absolute steal right now. So go on and grab yourself a Black Friday Raycon treat, because you deserve to listen to what you want using only the best. Now then, time to Mald. From their absolute very beginning as Space Marines, as the Great Crusade was just beginning, the Thousand Sons showed that in the future they would be nothing but complete and utter failures. Their starting was fine enough. There have been worse instances of newly minted Space Marines instantly going wrong. Their Primarch and Gene Seed source was Magnus the Red, who was the Psyker Primarch, so naturally anyone who tested as a good recipient for the Thousand Sons Gene Seed would be at least potentially good at Psyker stuff. So far so good, inasmuch as trying to make a dedicated army of wizards in the setting of 40k can be considered a good idea. But very quickly into the Great Crusade, you start to see just how much of a failure of an army, of a legion, the Thousand Sons will become. Now this may be a controversial statement, but if an army begins spontaneously melting into horrific monstrosities at random intervals, you do not have a very good army. No, I'm really thinking outside the box with that one, but it's true. And the Thousand Sons, just a few years into the Great Crusade, have already failed the task that for most people isn't a task. That's not even on the checklist. Why the hell would it be? The flesh change would rack the Thousand Sons, and between it and combat fatalities, well, you know their name. You know how things go. By the time they found Magnus, there was 1,000 sons of Magnus left. Apparently they had the name before that happened, because something Emperor foresaw this crap, but the point remains. They kept melting until there was only 1,000 left, which as an army is really pathetic. As much as plenty of us give GW crap for being bad with numbers, Space Marine chapters having only 1,000 Marines isn't necessarily the worst thing given their usual missions. They're deployed to fight in the highest stakes encounters where a surgical strike of these demigods gods of war can make all the difference. Failing that, they perform similar missions to hold the enemy off until the endless wall of meat that is the Imperial Guard can arrive to wage a more traditional war. Of course, that's for chapters. The Space Marine legions were the conquering army, and it's real damn hard to have a good, sustainable conquering army with only 1,000 dudes, magic or not. But thankfully they find Magnus and things can get better, right? Wrong, because even though this next thing isn't directly the Thousand Sons' fault, it's more the reason to look at them and just feel pity. For one, Big E not telling his kids about Chaos, or anyone that wasn't Malcador. This means that as an overall point, the Thousand Sons are like everyone else and don't really appreciate the horror that is the warp until it's too late. Since they're psychers who are inherently connected to the warp beyond anyone else, it's doubly so horrid for them. But because Magnus in particular doesn't know about things he really should know, he goes off into the warp to save the Thousand Sons in his own special way. And all it cost him was an eye, isn't that great? Oh, which was lost because of a deal he made with Tzeentch. Except he didn't know it was Tzeentch, or that there could be a Tzeentch, or that Tzeentch was anything but some exceptionally powerful entity of the warp, and not the chaos god of magic, fate, and backstabbing. So they meet Magnus, and now they're damned permanently. They just don't know it yet. Our men out of all people had some idea that whatever Magnus did would be important, but that's like saying the mountain you live next to might be important, and it turns out to be an active volcano. Bit of an understatement in hindsight. With them now being temporarily saved from the flesh change, however, we get to the part of the Thousand Sons' mass character development where we learn that they've always been assholes who obsess over knowledge. Does there happen to be some interesting warp knowledge on this otherwise completely unimportant planet? Time to put the entirety of this vital crusade on hold because the Thousand Sons found a limited edition copy of One Piece Chapter 30 and they collectively climaxed at the thought of getting a hold of it. Is there a battle actively taking place, but off to the side there's a funny looking warp artifact that in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter at all? My apologies, Leman Russ, but Magnus and his entire legion have better things to do so you and your forces can get bent. Oh, or my favorite example. Is there a library actively being shelled? Magnus and his legionnaires will stop it, not because that's a monstrous crime against humanity, no, no, no. Magnus outright said kill all the people you want, the books are what matters. He needs the lore. Him and his bastard sons all put up a psychic shield to keep the library from being shelled, up to and including it being bombarded from orbit. Unfortunately for him, but fortunately for my sense of schadenfreude, the person he was arguing with over and keeping the shield up to protect the library from was Conrad Kurz. I'm sure you can guess how Magnus's impassioned argument about the sanctity of knowledge went over with Kurz.
Wipe this pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy.
So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that they sucked horribly hard at being an army even after their gene seed issues were temporarily fixed. It's both pathetic and enraging. From the pathetic standpoint, they're so enslaved to knowledge they make Slaanesh followers look positively restrained. They hear a whisper of a rumor of a possibility of an artifact or some repository of lore, and they come across almost as hopeless addicts as they chase after it, as if they can't help themselves from trying to collect everything they can, regardless of how important whatever they're doing instead may be. From an enraging standpoint, this is a level of AWOL that would redefine military education in the real world if something like that happened. Imagine being any type of soldier in the Great Crusade. Space Marine, normal human, doesn't matter much. You receive word you're getting aid from the Thousand Sons, which is great. This is a pretty tough battle, and regardless of your opinions on Psychers, you can on some level accept they're good at conquering words. They arrive, they do some good work, and at the climax of the battle, they leave. Well, I mean, surely there's a good reason for this. Enemy forces must have warped in last second, and they deployed to deal with it. Yeah, that's a good explanation. That sounds reasonable. And then you find out that no, that didn't happen. Instead, on the next planet over in this system that you've already mostly conquered, you discovered that they found out there was a pawn shop on it that held some glowing artifact or other. The moment they heard about it, the entire Legion left to go comb the planet for anything else that might be found. The level of rage I would be feeling in that moment if I was a commander during that battle would summon a rift directly to the Brass Citadel. Holding knowledge as sacred can be applaudable, but there's holding knowledge as something worth preserving, and then there's this shit. This is infuriating to read about, more so because until the Council of Nicaea, I don't think it ever bit them in the ass. You ever know someone who would always do the stupidest, most outrageous garbage every time you talk to them or hear about them, but it never seems to catch up with them? That was the Thousand Sons. At least Leman Russ waited until he and the Lion had conquered Foch to punch his brother in the face. At least the Space Wolves do their job before they go get piss drunk. Until, of course, Nicaea, where without getting into too much detail, Magnus got exactly what was coming to him. No more Psychers, no more Librarius, no more casting telekinetic magic because you're too lazy to just walk over and grab a beer from the fridge yourself. Magnus, in spite of his initially okay argument, failed to realize that almost no one there liked him, almost no one there wanted him, time, and that what he proposed instead for Psykers was absolutely insane. And what did they do with this edict to stop casting magic like they've been doing? Absolutely nothing. And while I started this video by saying they're pathetic more than anything, as I've been writing, I've discovered it's more of a 1-2 punch for why they suck. It's this fun mix of them being pathetic and enraging. Post-Nicaea, they showed the pathetic part by way of the addiction comparison I made earlier. The literal moment the council was over and everyone went their separate ways, Magnus just went, nah, we're gonna ignore the Emperor and everyone else and do our own thing. Which, granted, they weren't the only ones who did that. Jagged-Eye Khan and the White Scars, by virtue of being on the fringes of Imperial space at any given moment, just kind of maybe ignored it a little bit too. But you see, this is where the rage part comes in, because Jagged-Eye Khan and the White Scars were smart. They used Psykers when absolutely necessary. As I'm sure you can guess from the way I started this comparison, the key words of that sentence were, when absolutely necessary. If there was a problem that either couldn't conceivably be solved without magic, or if the other options were too costly, they broke out the Chain Lightning. They didn't do it for problems they could solve by other means because they could tell the warp was incredibly dangerous. The Thousand Sons, meanwhile, were specifically told by the Emperor they are delving far too deeply into matters he only brought up in passing as a way to keep them away from it. They heard him say that and they all just went, nah, I'd win. Look, I get it. I also don't like the Emperor. I have complained many times about the Emperor and will do so again in the future. But when he says, hey everyone, don't excessively tap into the alternate reality that's so dangerous we have to have a giant magical lighthouse and partially magic shields up whenever we interact with it. When you put it like that, I'm kind of inclined to agree with him. And they just went right back to it the moment he turned his back. Going off an earlier comparison again, this is the person you know who constantly goes 80 in a 30 speed zone and somehow got away with just a warning. By all accounts, this should have been a wake-up call, or at least a sign to dial their speed back to 50 so they avoid the really big speeding ticket. But no, they just kept going at it. So yada yada yada, we get the Horus Heresy, and for a brief moment where I stopped bullying them, Magnus breaking the webway wasn't a grievous error on his part. Not one I fault him for at any rate. Big E should have used his colossal intelligence to tell Magnus about the webway project that involved the golden throne Magnus was designed to sit on. I can't blame Magnus for that because he didn't have crucial information. I can blame Magnus for not picking up the phone when Lehman showed up to recreate the fall of Reach all over Prospero, though. I can blame Magnus for doing what the Halo TV show did and having all of Prospero's defenses just turned off. Reminder for anyone who forgot about that little nugget, by the way. Oni just taking the spaceborne assets defending Reach and leaving. But back to my intended bitching here, the Thousand Sons who aren't Magnus have a rare show of pulling their own heads out of their asses for a moment by ignoring their Primarch and trying to fight off the Space Wolves. It goes well for them until the Sisters of Silence arrive. It abruptly stops going well, and then Magnus finally gets involved as well. On the one hand, his entrance is awesome, and pretty much anything he looks at almost immediately dies. On the other hand, the pathetic part and enraging part come packaged together here. Magnus couldn't even stick to his guns and let his people be massacred, which is a realization that came only after the Space Wolves were allowed to just waltz past his defenses and burn down like 90% of the planet. Amazing stuff as always, Magnus the Red Buffoon. Thank you for participating. And then he teleports everyone out of Prospero and fully commits to Tzeentch, because as one final reason to feel bad for them, on top of Prospero burning down, the flesh change came back in force. Magnus would go on to hallucinate the Emperor offering him forgiveness if he just abandoned his sons. Or maybe it did actually happen and Vulcan was lying about Magnus dreaming it. Or Vulcan didn't know. Or God only knows, because internal consistency is for pussies. Ahriman, for his part, would begin his long and storied career of failing at everything he does by casting the Rubric of Ahriman to stop the flesh change. One moment the Thousand Sons were meat, the next about 5% of them were meat, and 95% of them were dust inside their armor. Those former flesh and blood beings, now called Rubric Marines, walk around as something you can barely even call a shell of their former selves. Their spirits only really flare back up when they're led by a sorcerer into battle, and even then it's just a sort of warrior's instinct kind of deal. Outside of that, they just kind of numbly stand around, which makes them decent guards. It's not like they're gonna get bored or need to go take a bathroom break, they're just dust. Alternatively, they're in a constant hellish limbo, and when a sorcerer drags them up to fight, it's like the Cenobites from Hellraiser digging hooks into their very souls. That one was told to me by someone else, though. I've not read that directly myself, so take it with a grain of salt. Either way, the end result is pathetic to look at. An entire legion of thinking human beings turned into automatons, still alive and present technically, but trapped in their armor for all eternity. As for Ahriman, he tried to do it again later. The Rubric, that is, this time to restore the dusty lads to flesh. Didn't work. If memory serves, he restored a single rubric back to flesh and saved himself from some unrelated nasty business. During all his various escapades, he's also somehow convinced himself that not only is he not a servant of Tzeentch, but that he can become an all-powerful god of magic and sorcery if he plays his cards right. Despite Tzeentch personally saving him from Magnus after he cast his first rubric. And despite Tzeentch considering him to be his greatest champion, arguably more so than even Magnus himself. I wish I could go through my life with that level of delusion. Oh, but don't worry, eventually he mostly calmed down on obsessively recreating the rubric. Now he's just trying to break into the Black Library. You know, the home base of the singular Eldar faction that's allowed to present a good showing of itself. Where the last remaining fully powered god they have is. Yeah, that'll totally work out for you, buddy. I believe in you. Going back to delusion, though, he likes to tell himself that he's unchanged after 10,000 years in the warp. To quote Iskander Kaon on Ahriman, "Yet I have seen the void that screams where his face used to be." Now granted, that man also claimed to have beaten Magnus in a 1v1 and a whole bunch of other crap, so God only knows how honest he is. But on this I believe him, so it goes to show you what you get with 1,000 Suns. Erasing the whole character is just as screwed as everyone else, and he not only doesn't recognize it, but refuses to. Which is an attitude that can make for an appealing character, but it can also make for a complete idiot of a character. Especially since all the other Chaos God champions seem to mostly be having fun with their lot in life, but no, this guy just has to showboat around thinking he's all independent. Word of advice, Ahriman, just because you can't see the strings doesn't mean you aren't a puppet. One last thing before I stop kicking a man who's been kicked by the universe since his birth, do you know how pathetic it is to be made a fool out of by the Ynnari? Welcome to Isaac Ahriman's wild ride, everyone. To his infinitely slight credit, he was doing good against them, which means nothing because you have a pulse you can kick the Ynnari's ass, but fair enough, I'll give him his credit. Then Yvraine reversed the rubric on a bunch of Marines, and when Ahriman was all like, "Everyone stop, I need to know how she did this," she had a Wraith Knight bust a hole in the webway and flung those regloved Marines into the warp. Ahriman screamed, ran in after them, and the matter more or less resolved itself. Ahriman got played by the Ynnari. The Ynnari. There's no coming back from that one, that's it. You're done. You were outplayed by the Ynnari. That's like getting outplayed by a class of violently crippled and brain-damaged kindergartners. You're done. Hang up your villain coat. It is time to retire. For one more lore reason, they're always either the second fiddle character or the twist villain in a really boring way. Let me use some of my own Eldar Farseer Psyker powers and predict every 1,000 Suns character you will read about if the book has them as a villain. Up until the ending, they will be subservient to the then main threat of the book. At the last moment, one of two things will happen. Their plan will go wrong and they will be executed by either the protagonist or the big bad, or their plan will go right and they become the main villain, to then be executed by the protagonist. Like in Space Marine 2, with what I won't even pretend to call a plot twist because I'm not going to insult you like that. And also, as a special lore bonus complaint just for you viewer, there will be some absolute BS about how this was all a part of Tzeentch's master plan and you are a mere puppet on a string, right before or after they die. Which, you know what? Yeah, that's another thing. The 1,000 Suns always go on about how Tzeentch sees all, Tzeentch is the architect of fate, or some variation of Tzeentch controls everyone ever. And you know what question I have in response? According to who? Tzeentch? The god of lying? Or demons of Tzeentch, who also regularly lie? Oh yeah, Mr. 1,000 Sun Sorcerer, Tzeentch definitely has a plan for you. Tzeentch totally isn't just as ultimately impotent as the rest of the gods, but he just makes shit up to hide that fact. I definitely believe you when you say Tzeentch could totally be all-powerful for real, guys, he just doesn't want to be. Yeah, okay, you magical clowns, do me a favor and conjure yourselves up a river to cry for me. Now this isn't do or don't 1,000 Suns, or a replacement for it, but I do have two brief tabletop negatives to give you. First is their army rule, and this one is only the lesser of the two evils because of what comes next. It helps you get command points, which itself is made easier if you control objectives, which so far so good. More command points, more better. Same for capturing objectives. It also involves rolling a die, which again, that's fine. It's a dice game, some randomness is appreciated. But to me, actually reading through it is like getting punched in the face by Games Workshop and then getting called a wizard-based slur, because it can help the enemy. In fact, depending on how many objectives you control, it's more likely to help the enemy than it is you. Real simple stuff. If someone uses a stratagem, roll a d6. On a 6, you get a command point. Except on a roll of 1 or 2, your opponent gets a command point. Now, of course, you add 1 to the roll if you control as many or more objectives than your enemy, but let me lay out a scenario for you of a hypothetical 40k game. Turn 1, you plonk down your guys as does your opponent, and each grab your closest command points. Your plan is in ascendance, so you get the bonus. It's turn 1. No one uses a stratagem. Army rule is useless. Turn 2, you get beat to the middle objective because your opponent goes first. Someone uses a stratagem. you roll and get a 2. Even if you had won that race, nothing would have happened, but now your opponent gets a command point because you know what, Thousand Suns player? Games Workshop hates you. They hate you and the thousands of hours edge highlighting that you put into painting this army. The funny thing is, from a lore standpoint, this absolutely tracks for a Tzeentchian army, but from a gameplay standpoint, I hate this, because without good objective control, their army rule, the thing that makes them unique and special amongst everyone else, has a better chance to hurt than help. It's either a 1/6 chance to help you, or a 1/3 chance to help you if you have objective control down pat. All other outcomes either do nothing or help the opponent. Their other tabletop downside is the big one. You know what it is. Their combat patrol. Are you interested in the Thousand Suns, the premier evil space wizards of the setting? From a descriptor as basic as that, I would be. Well, here's a goat. Is it a sci-fi goat? Does it have arcane armor or strange weapons that bend and twist space and time itself as it fights? No. By default, he's painted blue, and we gave him a gun. Go to hell, thanks for the $170. Nothing more needs to be said on top of that, because what more can be said? But the main reason, the ultimate reason, beyond all others I made this video, the straw that broke the camel's back into making me hate the Thousand Suns beyond any other, Magnus the Red's card and commander is the pinnacle of horse shit. That's right, I fooled you all with my own Tzeentchian plot. This video only exists because I wanted to complain about Magic the Gathering. Fair warning, I'm going to be loud, because thinking about this makes me angry. There's your warning, everyone who's listening to this while they're falling asleep. It's gonna get loud. The Chaos deck in Commander is mostly red-blue, because someone at Wizards of the Coast saw the second TTS Yu-Gi-Oh! Episode and thought it would be a good way for Chaos to actually play in Magic. Apparently, there's some black in there, but in the game that sparked all this nonsense, I never saw it. Nothing but red-blue all day, baby. I love facing Izzet. Meanwhile, I'm playing Tyranids, which need red, blue, green, and all I drew were red and blue lands and cards that needed green, but I didn't have any green lands. And this is an issue because apparently someone else at Magic saw the all-consuming hive of the Tyranids and went, yes. This is the faction that needs a large variety of colors to use effectively to represent the complex industry of fucking eating people. Now, the guy playing Magnus. He's a very good friend. I always enjoy spending time with him. He's a great guy to be around. But in that moment, I wish for his death. Because turn 1, he puts down a land. Also turn 1, he puts down a Soul Ring, which costs only 1 mana of any color. Turn 2, another land. Turn 3, oh look at that, Magnus only costs 3 mana of any color as well as red and blue. It's turn 3, the other guy has 3 lands down, the Soul Ring gives him 2 free floating mana, so now it's time for Magnus to show up. So from that point onward, it's time for Magnus to strap me down and shove his bright red dick straight down my throat, because he cheapens all sorcery by 1 mana cost and creates a 3/3 Chaos spawn whenever he attacks. But we aren't done, because the cherry on top of this cake is that he can fly. And with him being 4/5, I just have to sit there and accept that I'm taking 4 commander damage a turn, because oh what? You thought you would have fun playing this fun card game with your friends? It's only turn 4 and you don't have any flying monsters yet because you're playing Tyranids and everything in your deck is built on working in conjunction with like 50 other cards? Nah, this is Commander, bitch. We ball in these streets. You get to deal with some asshole's 5 bajillion free chaos spawn. Meanwhile, I'm here trying to build the Tyranids military-industrial complex up because that's a thing apparently. Oh, but the Tyranids can be really scary in Commander with their ways to gain counters. Not when you're fighting a 3-front war because everyone's afraid of the theoretical Tyranid deck I'd much rather be playing they can't be. The Chaos player didn't even win the game. It's just absurd to me. It's like, oh, it's turn 3. Oh, Magnus the Red? He's here? Turn 3? Awesome! Thanks to my channel members. You're all good people. If you'd like to help me out, subscribe or become a channel member if you're willing and able. Magnus the Red made me hate Magic the Gathering. Burn in hell, you giant red prick.